Okay. So warm welcome once again. I'm Karima Stauch, the URI Europe coordinator, and I'm so happy we are together today. And we have two amazing speakers, Lauren and Andrew, who took the initiative. We're doing these webinars and trainings around the world. So it's so wonderful. You also are doing one for Europe. That's an honor and a big pleasure. And we are so curious to hear from you. And I think most of you will know that Lauren is an interfaith minister and eco-chaplain, and she's been the climate action coordinator of URI since 2020, being inspired by the good work and the URI network. And Andrew is a husband and father who wants a better world for his daughters, and he's the Director of Sustainability and Global Affairs at the Center for Earth Ethics. So it's lovely having you here, and we are looking forward to the guide, Ecosystem Restoration Guide. We are not so many people, so we already have introduced each other a little bit. So maybe I can say a few words from your Europe side and then pass to you, Lauren. So there is a little bit, some people might have the question, URI as an interfaith network, why is it dealing with ecosystem restoration, which seems a very specific topic, but indeed it's been part of the URI charter process from the very beginning. And I think some of you will know, or many will know, that it's part of the URI purpose statement already, that we want to create cultures of peace, justice, and healing for the earth and all living beings. So it's peace, justice, healing for the earth and all living beings. So the earth's been there pretty much from the beginning in the conversations, because if you want to create peace, we need an ecosystem. We are all part. I think there is an awareness in people of faith in many times that we are interconnected. So we are part of one web of life. I could say that from my own tradition, Islamic tradition, in the Quran, it says that the earth will, at the day of judgment, complain how people treated her. So she'll break open and complain. And I think that in other traditions, religious traditions, we have similar things. And I think that people of faith have that sense of interconnectedness. And as URI Europe, it's been important for us to be part of the United Nations SDG Action Campaign. The office is located here in Bonn, and every week around in September, there is the Global Week to Act for SDGs, and we've been an official partner with URI, and the topic is often around climate action. Last year it was Flip the Script, and we also had a beautiful webinar with Lauren on that. And then I think that different cooperation circles in Europe do things, and we'll hear from you about it, I think, in the questions and answers part. But I'm aware, for example, of our Bulgarian CEC cooperation circle, the Bridges, who had that water as part of their annual youth camp that they do. So doing artwork around water and conversation and reflections around water. And I could say the same from our DML Bonn CC, our last 3-day Christian Islamic Abrahamic conference at Pentecost was on climate action. So we had speakers on the topic, exchanges on the topic. So I think it's relevant for many European CCs, even though some might wonder, what does an ecosystem look like if I'm living in a city? And I think you're going to touch on that. So I think with that, I tend it to you, Lauren. And thank you once again for coming, being here, all of you.
Thank you, Karima. And good afternoon and evening to so many of you. As Karima said, my name is Lauren, and I have the good honor of serving the URI network as the Climate Action Coordinator. And, you know, there are some interesting conversations happening in this space now around climate and around ecosystem. And I don't know that we really need to keep those things in separate compartments, because they are, of course, very, very related. But oftentimes when we're talking about climate, we're talking about the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, trying to bring the carbon down, trying to sequester it back into the soil and the ground where it does good things, instead of up in the air where we're breathing it and it's doing harmful things, right? But ecosystem restoration is a lot about keeping it in the soil. And it's also about this ecosystem, the ecosystem that exists between you and me, and the ecosystem that exists between me and all that is alive here outside my window, or this plant next to me. So what we want to explore with you all today is this idea of where might be an ecosystem that you and your community would wish to restore, and who might be missing in that conversation. Karima has done a great job already of highlighting some of the cooperation circles, the CCs, in the URI network who are overtly focused on these things. They are specifically working on water, peace building around water, or they are specifically working to add a community garden in a place where there hadn't been fresh vegetables, that sort of thing. Those are wonderful projects. But it could be that there's something else that you're aware of in your community that you feel curious about. And so today, Andrew and I are going to present a couple of ideas. And then with the time that we have left, we'd really like to hear from you about ideas that you have or questions that you have about how to be successful. And the important thing, I think, to remember in today's call is that we're not necessarily talking about the finished project. You know, we're not necessarily thinking about, and then we shut down the mine and a bunch of trees and beautiful pastures grew up and people were happy forever and ever, right? That would be great. But the first step often is the hardest one. And that's what this guidebook is about. The first step is about bringing people together to have a conversation about that mine and all of the pros and the cons for the community, because that mine is there. And how do we start understanding what Earth wants and what the people want and what would be most healing and helpful for everyone? And that's tricky. That's really tricky. And so this guidebook, we hope, is a way to start to have that conversation. I'm seeing that folks are at least kind of putting names and locations maybe into the chat, which is great. And like I said, toward the second part of the call, we actually will get to hear from some of you about some of the more specific ideas that you have about ecosystems you are in. I know we are covering quite a few of the continents on this call, which is really great. So, Andrew, anything that you want to add here? Should I go into the guidebook? Do you want to just maybe introduce yourself a little bit first or add anything to what I've said?
Sure. And thank you. It's good to be here with everyone, whatever time of the day it is for you. It's morning for me. So no, I think that's perfect, Lauren. And just the phrase, what is the most healing and helpful, I think is such a good container for a lot of this work. And so I want to thank you for saying that. And just for the Center for Earth Ethics, we've engaged in this work with URI and with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And so this work that we're doing here in this guidebook is part of a much bigger global effort on restoration. Some of the projects are huge, involving member nation states, and others are small and grassroots. And I think for me, why this work is so important, whether it's the grassroots or these enormous projects, is that it is bringing that healing. It is finding ways to bring life to the spaces that are directly near you. I feel like the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, all these crises are so large and they can feel overwhelming. And so finding ways that we can have an impact, and every impact matters. I think that's what I've learned the most from this work in the restoration space, is there's no work that isn't useful or practical or helpful. Even the small things really make a big difference. And so for us, this is finding ways to build help build this larger global community of people who are looking around them and figuring out ways to help. And we hope that this guidebook can assist in that process. So back over to you, Lauren.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. In the chat box, there is a link that will take you to the guidebook. You're able to download it there if you wish. The guidebook is currently in English only, that it may be translated into other languages in the future, we'll see. Before I share my screen and take you into the guidebook, one way of maybe thinking about it is actually at the back of the book. It doesn't start with this, but in the last few pages of the book, you will see case studies. There is one case study about a project that happened in the United States around protecting our air, restoring air for a community. There is another story about food, protecting our food and making sure that a space that once was very, very fertile could be that fertile again. And that story is from Jordan. There is another story on water and caring for a river, and that story is in India. There is another story, what am I forgetting, Andrew? There's a city's story, which is really exciting. How do we restore our city and the ecosystem that can be in a very urban area? And that is in Mombasa, Kenya. I feel like there might be one. Oh, and the species, that's the last one. The endangered species, the Philippine eagle. And so in the Philippines, people came together to see what they could do to protect a very regal bird, the Philippine eagle. And in each one of these stories, as you read them, as you look at them, the community and what they did was very different. It was very customized and specific because of what that community was trying to restore, what they needed to accomplish. And much of it was peace building. No surprise at URI, right? In the Philippines, there were indigenous actors who were already very involved in protecting this bird. And there were some NGOs who were also interested in protecting, but how were these groups working together, right? How were the government officials also playing into policies and things to protect endangered species? In this country, in the United States, there are big petrochemical plants that make a lot of money for the people in that industry, but they're wreaking havoc on the children and the elderly and the other people who live near them because they can't breathe the air. And so what sort of conversation needs to happen to start to create equity and justice in a space where there is so much profit at stake, right? So, like I said, it's not that any of those folks have necessarily gotten to the end goal. It's not a finished ecosystem restored, but they're in really important conversations about it. And so that's what this guide is trying to inspire for the rest of us. I will just share my screen so briefly because I do want to hear from each of you about ideas you have. This is the guide. And like I said, the case studies are at the back. In the first part of the guide, I would encourage you to use these first 1 or 2 pages just as a way of maybe thinking about your cooperation circle or your faith group and how you are thinking about values, culture, and spirituality as a way to inspire the conversation. Sometimes people think that faith and science are separate, and our friends at the UN and certainly at URI and Center for Earth Ethics, we feel the opposite. We feel that faith and science are very good friends. They're on the dance floor together having a good time. And we need to look for the ways that our sacred texts uphold the ways that science allows us to be intimate with nature and to learn from this incredible living system that we call home. So the first few pages are sort of about helping us think about that, especially if those ideas are new for the people that we're going to be working with. And then the next couple pages of the guide are really about thinking through who should be in the conversation, who might be missing, how would we invite that person who's missing, how do we find them and invite them. Also just thinking about the space itself, what wants to be here, that maybe once was here but has been degraded, and how could we restore it. So just asking some of those initial questions, and then over in this section of the guide, really starting to bring the circle together to have the conversation or conversations, because hopefully you all will like each other so much and you'll be having such a good time with this project that you'll have lots of meetings together. And then over here in this green box, Andrew and I are so curious to hear about what happens in the place where you are. And furthermore, if there are hurdles that you're encountering, if you have things that you would like to problem solve, we would like to hear that too. Maybe we know people in the network or elsewhere with our friends at UNEP who could be supportive and could help. So we're interested in what kinds of questions you have too. And then over here, to the end of the book are all of the case studies that I mentioned. So that's an orientation to the guide. It's not long, less than 15 pages, but just an orientation to how it works and what we're hoping to offer. Anything you want to add, Andrew? And would you like to tell us a little bit more about the UN Decade?
Sure. Yeah, the UN Decade is a program by the UN Environmental Program and the FAO, which is the Food and Agricultural Organization, and really understanding that in order to encounter and deal with the climate crisis, we need to look at the biodiversity crisis and understand that these are two sides of the same coin. And in order to, well, there's a lot of in orders here, but what's important is that the earth is in trouble and we are called to help. And how do we do that help? And so a lot of this restoration work is really focusing on this biodiversity and what's going on. And this is year 2 of the decade of action for ecosystem restoration, really looking to keep the world as green as it is right now, and then help build back more nature as we move forward, with an emphasis of restoration on forests and wetlands, rivers and streams, and of course air. And so as I said earlier, a lot of this effort that we're doing is really trying to help build out awareness, to build out grassroots action, and to just create more community. I think, Lauren, you said so well at the top, there's the ecosystem of our own relationships with one another and with the earth itself. And so much of this guide is, focused on that as much as the action itself and the earth. And so what I'd say is that, and again, just to echo what you said, Lauren, is there's no wrong action other than inaction, I suppose. Every group that we worked with did this in a different way, whether it was gathering together a group of activists and active advocates and scientists, city officials. We had one that was almost purely interfaith dialogue focused, looking at peacemaking and restoring relationship with people and one another, and then seeing how that work can help influence the restoration work that needs to happen around us. I think one thing that's helpful for me in this fight, as I look at all the things that need to be done, is learning who is already doing it. It can feel very lonely. It can feel very overwhelming. And so a big piece of how we want to start this and what we did in our process for doing these dialogues was seeing who was already doing it and then figuring out how we could help. And what I learned is that there's so many people, entire communities, entire organizations dedicated to a problem that I thought that no one saw. And so then the work that I started to do was, well, how can I contribute to this? How can I bring in people who are also working at it, but there isn't a conversation between those two groups? What expertise and knowledge do I have to share that isn't there? How do I just platform a conversation? Can I bring in somebody from the UN? Can I bring in somebody from a city council? And so a lot of the work of this guidebook, at least, is creating the conditions for a better conversation and to help see the problem from a different vantage point, bringing together people who are already working on it, and then figuring out how the cooperation circle, or how the folks, at least for our dialogues, could help accelerate the progress. And I'll use one example and then I'll stop. When we did this, our consultation in Mombasa, which is really focused on the city of Mombasa and then the mangroves that act as a natural seawall for the city itself. There's this dual conversation. One, how do people help restore and protect these mangroves? But then also, how do they look at city development? How do they look at the ecosystem of the city, creating green spaces, putting nature in, dealing with coming heat, and all these issues? And so, you never really know who shows up to listen. And there are two important people who were there. One was a city council person from the city of Mombasa. Another was a representative from the Catholic diocese, who listened and learned and started motivating some action. One on the governmental side, looking at the effect of heat and creating green space and equitable green space. And then somebody from the diocese started looking at how they can transform their churchyards and those green spaces to be more welcoming and to encourage biodiversity. And so that are just kind of examples where you don't know what's going to happen when the conversation starts, but it's always exciting to see where it goes. And so I see we have a hand up. I'll pass it over to you, Lauren, and I'll stop here.
Thank you, Andrew. And this is perfect, because now we're ready to hear from you, JJ. Do you have a story you want to share or a question about what we've shared so far?
Thank you, Mama Raula. I'm happy to tell you that today I'm very happy to see that we have heard almost everything. I'm in Uganda, and I wanted to tell you that now the town which was just a town is now a city in Mbale. And in Mbale recently, like 3 months ago, we had very much flood because we are in the mountains of Elgon, and it killed over 80 people. So we lost the lives of over 80. So, as you know, we Peace Kaomera, we have already begun the planting of trees, and now after that rain, those rain is killing people. Now it is very dry, and we are expecting according to the people, those who knows the weather forecast, they are saying we are to get some rains in May, which is a long time because it is very hot. So that's why I always follow and see how we can manage this global warming and everything. So we are very serious, and as I told you that last year we planted over 100,000 trees. This time we are targeting 1 million trees. And I'm happy to tell you that in the city, now just a tree is very expensive. So that's why I'm following you, so that we can get support and find that we fully fulfill our dream of planting 1 million trees in the city of Mbale, because the space is big. We can establish those trees. So that is the story I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, JJ. Andrew, any thoughts? You want to respond or?
No, just thank you, JJ. And the ambition is enormous. And I think, I mean, as the weather changes, right, we need to figure out how to change along with it, helping people to understand why it's changing, what they can do about it. And so as much of, there's restoring ecosystem, it's also helping people to restore hope, to restore understanding, and to try to learn, because I think there's these pieces, right, where we want to revive what was once there, but we also need to understand that climate change is changing the conditions of what can grow in a certain place. And so there's also needs to be that understanding of what species will thrive here now, what with changing weather, with changing heat, and so it's just such important work to be engaging people and to be each tree represents a hope and change and a commitment. And so doing that work is so important. And just thank you for raising it up.
Thank you, JJ, so much for your excellent work and for inspiring the rest of us. I also just second what Andrew said about how in a changing climate, what we once used to do that worked is going to be different now. And it is going to take the support of others from around the world for Uganda to be able to plant 1 million trees. So that isn't on any of us individually, but it is on us collectively, because our planet is one giant ecosystem interdependently woven to other ecosystems, right? Ecosystems within ecosystems. So JJ, let me just ask for a thumbs up. Are you familiar with the WWF tree growing guide?
Not yet.
Okay,
Not yet.
I will share that as well. It works nicely with this one, and there may be some additional resources there for you.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
Yeah. Are there others who would like to share a story or ask some questions about an ecosystem near you?
Maybe Zachariah, can you ask?
David, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm curious about what is happening in Finland, and if you have any thoughts about how something like this could get used or not.
Well, as mentioned in my chat introduction, that I belong to a group here that's trying to make the city government understand the ecological side of their decisions. And they've made suggestions, for example, that every time they cut down trees on city land, that's in the forest that's owned by the city, they should plant new trees instead some other place. If they want to make a new housing developed area, they have to make new plantations somewhere else to make up for the ones they've removed. I'm not quite sure if it went through or not, though. It was quite recent. And there's a lake nearby that's going to be drained, and they're trying to stop that. So we've been having a long break over the winter. Most of us are retired people and haven't had very many meetings lately, but now there's one coming up next week. So I'll be there and find out what's been going on over the past few months. But other than that, I can't really say outside of my own area. In Finland, of course, there's also this big debate about the carbon sink and how much forest should be harvested every year and how much should be replaced, and it's not being cut at the right time and all of these things. It's in the news almost every other day, and that's quite a big debate going on, and the elections are coming up next month, so all the parties are getting in their word what they think about it. So it's a big question now. But otherwise, that's about all I can say about Finland, I think, right now.
Thank you.
And in Brazil, with the new government, we have hope again that we can restore a lot, and the forest, the Amazon forest, can live. We hope. We are having, oh, my camera is having problem. We are having now many politics, wonderful people interested in the environment. So we have hope again. Thank you.
Thank you, Salette. And I can imagine, you know, Brazil is such a huge piece of land. It's such a big country that there are lots of ecosystems. I mean, the rainforest is the obvious one, but even just within the cities, right? There could be places where trees have been planted but neglected, or parks have been degraded, but they could actually be beautiful spaces for bees and birds and other pollinators to visit, right? So there are a lot of things about a place like Brazil that offer us opportunity to restore ecosystems. Brazil and other countries too.
Yes, indeed. I don't know, Shannon. Shannon, can you say something?
Hi, yeah, I'm Shannon Smith. I'm also at the Center for Earth Ethics with Andrew. Really nice to join you all. I've been just following the process of this work, which has been really insightful. And I do communications work at the center and projects work there. I also support grassroots movements for protection of waterways, rivers and wells. And so this is a really interesting conversation because I think it very much applies to the work that I see. I do some support work in Europe as well, mostly in Ireland. And there's a lot of conversations right now about implementation of the Water Framework Directive and also meeting biodiversity targets. And so there's a lot of work on how to combine those efforts and the healing of the riparian borders of the rivers in order to address biodiversity, native woodland reforestation, and protection of waterways. So I think this conversation guide would be incredibly helpful for activating people on some of those projects. So congratulations and thank you for doing this work.
Thank you, Shannon.
Shannon's being modest. She's doing a bunch of incredible work around the River Boyne in Ireland. And because of the campaigns that she's working on, it's been raised national attention. She is secretly a hero and she's doing incredible work. So thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, Andrew.
We are probably not going to be here for the full hour, but we do still have time for one or two stories or questions. If there are others who haven't shared yet who would like to, the floor is yours. I welcome hearing from you.
Hi, well, I'm Sally and I live right near San Francisco, and I love the essence of this meeting is the power of connecting conversations. I mean, the energy locally, but this feels, even though small, like, yeah, just continuing these kinds of connecting conversations, because what came from me, so my daughter is a principal of part of the firm of it's called David Baker Architects here in San Francisco, dedicated to low-income housing. They just put out this manual. Their principles for building homes is basically in consideration of human ecosystems, the bio ecosystem. And I'm just struck, oh, are architects involved? Because I mean, they are shaping a lot of communities here. They're trying to, interrupt the homeless, the people who need housing, with housing that's basically connects people to nature as well as doesn't destroy the nature. So it's just made me think like, oh, I never thought that their information might at least inspire the environmental movement, because they're not perhaps considered in the same channels. But I can send you I can do a little research about that and see how maybe that connection can add something to what we're talking about. And I'm going to have to go in a few minutes, but I wanted to offer that.
I'm so glad you're here, Sally. And when Andrew and I were at the COP15 last December, the UN cities had a pretty big presence. We are thinking about how, JJ's example too, that this village became a city. So we're thinking about how do these big areas of land that once were undeveloped now have lots of development. We need nature corridors. We need ways for other species to get through and to find their water sources and to reach the forests. And so there is a lot of thoughtfulness happening in certain spaces about this. And this guide might be one more way of trying to further those conversations. Really excellent. Bye, Sally. I also
like
go ahead,
I also
Karima.
like your emphasis on the conversations around it, and also looking at what is already there. So that's also a nice way. For example, in the area where I live in Bonn, once on a plateau, on a hill, there is an initiative that took out very plain, let's say, green, just to cover the ground, and they put like bee habitat there, so that there is more flowers and there is lots of insects coming. And I think it might be quite interesting asking them, how did you do it, if other people want to do it, and ask a few of these initiatives, and that's a good starting point, really. So I love that you're stressing the importance of all these little initiatives and the connection through conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karima. Let's hear from Elizabeth and David before we wrap things up. Morgana, too, if you have anything you would like to add.
Thank you. I was happy to hear from Karima that in Islam, the earth will ask what we did with her when we, on our final day. And we in our Catholic tradition, we have the knowledge that Jesus talked to the storm. And I would like to know, in other traditions, is there a feeling or a knowledge that we can change weather, climate, storms with our prayers? Or can we bring here in our surrounding, when it's very dry, people come together and pray for rain? And so for me, it's just interesting to know that if other traditions also have a idea how to pray for the best, that every parts in the world have the right amount of rain. I think this would be a prayer that should change a little bit. So thank you. Sorry for my stumbling.
Elizabeth, I want to have an entire conversation, a whole call about that. And maybe we will at a future Gathering for Earth call, because we could be here for a long time responding. But certainly in the chat box, we're seeing that many traditions have rain prayers. And I think that this consultation guide is a form of prayer, because when people come together and act together, it's a form of prayer. So both and, right? Really asking for divine support and intervention, and also coming together with our hands to do what we can. Thank you. David, JJ, Morgana, Duncan has joined us. There's a lot of activity all of a sudden. David, go ahead.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, this group that I belong to, once we watched a series of lectures on the net. It was about resilience, and we watched them individually, and then we met once a week to discuss them together. I was wondering if either you or Andrew would have time, if the group is interested, to have a session with my little group online, that we could go through the guide with you and talk about it in our situation, how it would affect us.
Yep. We're happy to do that.
Okay. I could put my email in the chat then, and you can contact me.
Very good. I'll be sending a follow-up message at the end of today's call, and you and I can connect.
Okay.
Thank you, David. JJ, you had something you wanted to offer, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to listen the system
Of area that I'm Jewish, and according to the Jewish law, when the children of Israel were getting out of Egypt, God commanded them not to go under the place tree, especially the trees of fruit, so that they can keep the environment and the people enjoy eating. So that is one of the traditions of the Jews. And I wanted to tell you that in Uganda, the founder of Judaism in Uganda was a black person called Kakunguru. He planted trees along the roads everywhere in the whole of the country. And those trees had been destroyed. So I'm also trying to cooperate. So please, it is very traditional, and it is the command that we should plant trees. Thank you.
Great. That's a nice example of, Torah and indigenous, local to the space, right? Different practices coming together and in collaboration. Beautiful. Salet?
Yes, let me say something. My niece was here, no? You saw her, but now she's a little bit shy to say something about the work she's done. She's doing in our. We have a piece of land here in Brazil, 100 kilometers from Brasilia, since 1960. And now she's transforming a part from this piece of land in agroforestry. And she's doing amazing work. And she studied here in Brazil, and then she did the master in Germany for 2 years. And she's doing this experience. We are very glad that she's doing this.
We are very glad. Even if you are hiding back there behind the camera, we are very, very glad. Morgana, did you want to add something? You're muted. You're muted.
So I'm working from my telephone. As I said, I'm still in St. Martin in the Caribbean, which is really nice. Duncan will recognize where I am because I'm on the Dutch side. So hi, Duncan. Just two things.
Morgana.
One of the things that I've noticed here is the lack of cooperation with governments with restoration, and I'm actually referring to the situation here in St. Martin. In 2017, there was a huge hurricane, Irma, which more or less destroyed the whole island. I mean, there was virtually no building that was left unscathed. And what I notice now is the huge, and I mean, gigantic problem with waste management. It seems as if some of the waste has become kind of a landfill, and because they've actually not done anything with it, it's actually become new land. But it's also very toxic. And the water that drains through, because of course it's a tropical island, so there's quite a lot of rainfall. So the rainfall comes through that landfill and then flows into one of the traditional, what they call the salt ponds, because salt is one of the things that was kind of won here, or mined, whatever, how you ever call it. But what again, really me kind of angry is the lack of local government and that kind of level. And I think we should not forget that lobbying to our local government. I know in Brazil, of course, we've done that. Select is very used to lobbying on behalf of the indigenous people. That's sort of for everybody. It really is important that we continue to lobby when we can, demonstrations, whatever, and because it is, if you don't, our voices will never be heard. Now, in the Hague, in the Netherlands, of course, we've got the International Court of Justice, and that is also the place to where things like ecocide, Bolsonaro, there was a case against Bolsonaro still at the International Court of Justice. So what I'm saying is that we can also do a lot for advocacy, demonstrations. So let your voice be heard. And I think in many respects, we need to also connect. And I think you and I is very good at networking. Today, as Sally's just said, these meetings are so important because it's our opportunity to meet people from different countries and hear about the different problems we're hearing about the environment. That's one thing I just wanted to say. And the other thing I just wanted to quick to Elizabeth, of course, from many people, indigenous people of the earth, we also follow the moon, the lunar cycle. And we know, of course, the effects the moon has on our water, not just not the tides, but also ourselves. And often because we have this constant connection with the moon, then you are already putting prayers. This is the way we actually continually have this conversation with the moon. And I recommend anybody who's never had a conversation with the moon, have a try. It's brilliant. So that's my kind of tip for today. Go and have a chat with the moon. So thank you.
You brought smiles to every box on this Zoom screen, Morgana. Thank you. Duncan, I know you have joined us a little bit late in the game, but would you like to add anything or just share a bit?
Yes, I would like to add something. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. No, indeed, I was unable to connect from the very start. But the thing I have been wondering about is the relation between traveling and kind of leveling that up with tree planting. I was thinking sometimes it's unavoidable. I shouldn't say unavoidable, but sometimes it's part of our being to be in other places as well, and then you cannot avoid using the airplane to get where you want to go, because there's no possibility to go by car or by bicycle or sometimes even by train. So I was thinking whether isn't possible to combine flight using the air flight with planting trees. And so I was thinking if like going to a certain place where there is a local CC, that there should be some kind of program in which you can say, well, I have traveled from Europe to Africa, and one of the things I want to do is to take part in activity which involves planting at least one tree. So in a way to compensate for the emission and for journey that you have embarked upon. So perhaps that could be something that can be developed within URI, such a program, because we have these events coming up in Africa in June. We have events coming up in Europe, and for some of us, it's impossible not to take a flight if you want to travel. So very much welcome the idea of trying to design a program that would kind of help people who are traveling, that they should not be feeling offended or guilty, but that they can, after having take the plane, taking part in the planting ceremony.
Thank you, Duncan. I think, Andrew, you may have thoughts on this too. My initial response is I like the invitation to think about meaningful ecosystems restoration because I am a consumer, because I am a human, because I eat food, because I use electricity, because I drink water. I want to be sure that I reciprocate, that I give back to Earth in a meaningful and substantive way. And some of the things that I do as a consumer, depending on where I live and how much wealth I have, are even more destructive, right? That I do have the privilege of hopping on an airplane. Not everyone does, but I do. And so how then do I account for that? And one very important way of doing it is to be a part of restoring ecosystems. There are some ways that that idea is being commercialized right now, and it's potentially problematic. But I think what you're saying in essence is really good. And I don't know, Andrew, if you have other thoughts about that, or do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, no, I think you did a good job summarizing it. I think we live in a world where it's a consumeristic world, and there are things that we need to encounter. And I really appreciate the thought and the effort to try to, how do we offset these things in our own ways? How do we, do the good, knowing that there's also some harm attached. So it's really important to think about, and I'm so glad you raised it.
I am so grateful for everything that people have been willing to share today, the questions that were asked. And it would be my hope that some part of this consultation guide inspires you to just try something. In the CPAC region, there were some young people who were talking about cleaning up a beach. And there were people who had been on the planet longer who were talking about taking on the companies that put plastic on the beach in the first place. And we need to do both. And we need each other to figure out how to do that well. So I'm really grateful for each of you and for the time that you took out of your other important activities to be here for this hour today. Andrew, would you like to close us out before passing it back to Karima?
Just very briefly, and to echo, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet and see and hear from all of you. Just incredible amounts of gratitude, and thanks for what each of you is doing in your own way, in your own places, in your own communities. And I look forward to finding ways for us to intersect again. I would love to hear about the work that you're doing, if this guidebook is helpful at all, and how we can continue to be in community with one another. Though we're separated by a whole lot of miles, we are together in spirit and effort. So thank you, and Karima, over to you, and thank you so much for organizing this. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, there is just to add gratitude, I'm definitely inspired. I love the conversation approach, and it's been so nice to hear from people, and I hope we'll meet again and also recommend the guide to others, people who are working in the field, but also the people in general, because everybody is touched by the topic. So thank you also from my side. It's been lovely. And yeah, it's a great initiative, and it's always so good to exchange, and hope we'll connect again on the topic. And wish you a beautiful day, beautiful evening, and yeah, lots of love and blessings. Bye-bye, my friends.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Your kids